Robert, I'd like to start with a general overview of how anthropologists and biologists define an orgasm. What is it? What is going on in our bodies when we experience it?
First thing to say is the anthropologists and the biologists wouldn't necessarily agree with each other.
Robert J. King, PhD, author of numerous studies on the female orgasm, researcher at the School of Applied Psychology at University College Cork, Ireland, expert in evolutionary psychology and sexual selection.
Part of the reason for that is that human beings we're not neutral about this. Some cultures celebrate it, some cultures try to prevent it happening. We're not 100% sure why that is, so even just pinning down the physiology isn't easy. It becomes difficult because humans don't have sex in laboratories, unless they have a particular kind of kink for that sort of thing, which means that the full range of human behaviour isn't present in laboratories.
Can you briefly speak on how orgasms are studied? Do they stick couples into a CT scanner or what? What approaches have been used to study it?
Okay, so the research, I would say that our research is the natural successor to it. It goes back to the 1970s, and it's the husband and wife team of the Foxes, and they had sex in a natural setting. They were both doctors. Excuse me, the lady part of the team, she had a radio telemetry device inserted in her and a pressure change device. They had sex in the marital bed and they measured the pressure changes. And they also did a lot of work to do with oxytocin. And what became interesting was that some orgasms that women were experiencing were, they had a lot of, there were a lot of effects that were symptomatic of oxytocin production. So a sense of loss of self, a sense of apnea, which is a breath catching, sometimes internal pulsing, and a whole bunch of extreme feelings of trust, and all of those things we know oxytocin produces. So that allows us to hone in on the oxytocin related mechanisms. All I would say that our research does is it suggests that the orgasms which produce internal phenomenological symptoms of oxytocin seem to be the ones that would be more associated with fertility. We came up with a protocol for actually analysing the mechanism directly. And briefly, would listeners know what a moon cup was? So a moon cup is something that some women use to collect menstrual fluid. It's about the sort of size of a diaphragm. It's a flexible. I don't think it's made of rubber because that wouldn't be environmentally friendly enough. But it's something that can be inserted and collect menstrual fluid. And it can collect other things as well. So we inserted a sperm simulant, the same stuff they use in porn movies to simulate sperm. It's also got the same viscosity and other kinds of properties. We had the women in question masturbate to orgasm using a Hitachi magic wand, which is a very powerful vibrator. And we then measured what comes out. There's a phenomenon called backflow. So up to an hour after intercourse, the vagina excretes a load of material, and you can measure what comes out again. And if the woman's had an orgasm, a deep orgasm, as we measured them, she excretes less material, about 50 to 20% less. The idea was that these pressure changes, which are quite considerable, could cause material to go up the ipsilateral, the fallopian tube that has the dominant follicle there.
A lot of fertility clinics say this, to just make sure the woman orgasms when you're trying to get pregnant. However she orgasms. If for no other reason that she's going to be relaxed, reduce her cortisol levels, and that's probably going to increase fertility. Now, we think there's more than that happening. We think it's almost certainly increasing oxytocin. But that said, some orgasms seem to increase oxytocin production more than others, based on the reports from women saying that these kinds of orgasms from deep tissue stimulation with a very dominant partner who's also considerate, that produces the apnea, the internal pulsing sensations, the feelings of floating, and all the other things that we know are attendant on orgasm. And that suggests that it's a measuring mechanism, and also suggests there's a reason why men are right to be anxious. When men are feeling judged, you're being judged. That's happening. Your anxiety is well founded.
an extremely delicately balanced measuring instrument. And sometimes what it measures is the genes of that woman don't want to have your babies. And that's a brutal thing to face. And men often don't like realizing that, which is, one of the reasons why women will fake orgasm at us. Female choice mechanisms are often cryptic, and they predominate, and they're the key driver in human primate evolution. And when we start thinking, well, maybe female orgasm is a female choice mechanism, then you start thinking, well, that's why they don't orgasm all the time, because men aren't stimulating them enough. A lot of my research could be boiled down to the words of Germaine Greer, a feminist scholar, who, in response to some partner, said, "I'm not frigid, you're boring."
In your book, you argue with a philosopher, Elizabeth Lloyd, who said that women only experience clitoral orgasms. Can you tell us more about this and whether women really experience 3 different orgasms, clitoral, vaginal, and anal?
Because I'm going to sound a bit mean, I should preface things by saying without Professor Lloyd, I wouldn't have a career, because without her book, which I think is almost completely wrong, I wouldn't have been stimulated to a place here. Okay, so Professor Lloyd doesn't know what a clitoris is, which is something that's kind of embarrassing to say, but it's true. And she's had multiple opportunities to update herself, and she's ignored every single one of them. In our research, we tried to stay away from the terms clitoral and vaginal in respect of orgasms because they have a history, and the history is largely to do with Sigmund Freud. He was saying that if women had orgasms that were non-coital, then they were immature. So he was certainly coming from the perspective of controlling the mechanism by which an orgasm should happen. And also, Freud didn't know what a clitoris is. Now, sort of in the 19th century, it was a bit more forgivable to mistake the glands for the rest of the thing.
Can I show a clitoris?
Yes, please.
So the anatomy of the clitoris, the byproduct you count as the clitoris, have you believe that the clitoris is like the male nipple. So I've taken to carrying one of these around with me. Again, this is a life-size clitoris. If you buy the book, it has instructions to print it out. It's much larger than people suppose. The external part is quite small, but the whole thing is about 4 inches in length. It's erectile tissue. It's multiply innervated. It has its own somatosensory cortex connected to it. And it's designed to be stimulated both by external stimulation and internal stimulation. And that's called the glands of the clitoris. And it's homologous to the glands of the penis. It's smaller, but it's got very, very concentrated nerve cells. And it would be, if you were doing gender reassignment surgery, this would be an area to focus on, because you don't want to remove that, because there's a lot of sites of sensitivity and pleasure there. However, they're not the only ones. And the rest of it is, these are the bulbs of the clitoris, and these are multiply innervated too. They're erectile tissue. And if you imagine sort of sideways, and you imagine a penis sort of going in, then these areas bend to accommodate it, and the penis bends to accommodate it, so that as this area becomes aroused, the penis is rubbing the full leg. There's also, this is only a clitoris, doesn't have everything, there's also a G-spot on the anterior half of the wall, which is called the Skene's gland. Sometimes people mix it up with the clitoris. That's interesting because if men care about female pleasure, one of the things they go is there a button to make my girlfriend work? And they sort of go, oh, that's the clitoris and that's this bit. And then they sort of mix it up with the G-spot, and that's different.
And this must be the G-spot? Вот это.
So at the back there, that would be roughly where you'd find the Skene's gland. But I mean, that's not part of the clitoris. The Skene's gland is typically about 1 inch to 1.5 inches up inside the anterior vaginal wall. So it'd be the outside of it. And you can feel it. I mean, if it's aroused, it's got a slightly rough texture, and you can feel it inside there. Once again, I mean, this is one of these things that's really interesting, that all women have one of these things. It is not, once again, it has to be rediscovered every so often, just like the clitoris does, which is itself fascinating to me on a sociological level.
Is there a person who discovered this G-spot, and why is it called so?
Okay, so yes, the first person to document it was somebody called Grafenberg. Which is why it's called the G-spot. But in the modern era, the person who is most associated with studying it and its effects is Beverly Whipple, who with Barry Komisarek did the research that I was talking about earlier with people with MRIs. It was one of these things where it became obvious that female sexuality was a lot more complex, and female anatomy was a lot more complex than the standard story was saying.
So these are women who have been effectively cut in half by some kind of accident. So there is no spinal connection between the urogenital system and the brain. and yet they could still orgasm, sometimes through visualization, sometimes through particular kinds of stimulation. Bev Whipple also is the one who studied the G-spot initially, and essentially what she's found is that there are a whole bunch of different pathways leading from the female genital system to the brain. When women report orgasm, they report a much wider range of stuff. And more importantly, they report different stuff depending on different practices and different partners. And you've got a bunch of things going on there. For example, we know that the pH of the vagina goes down. Got that right way around. Yes, becomes less acidic when a woman ejaculates. Now, that could be it's making the vagina more hospitable to sperm. It's certainly worth investigating. That's one of the reasons why it's unlike the male system, which is really quite simple, really quite straightforward. You press the button and it works. Like that straightforward, but it's much more straightforward. Female system is way more complicated. It's functionally integrated.
В некоторых культурах orgasms are approached rather differently in various cultures. Some even believe that women shouldn't experience an orgasm at all. Can we say that orgasms are more of a cultural or evolutionary thing, sort of a byproduct? Like you don't have to experience an orgasm to reproduce, and like orgasms have no evolutionary significance.
So the first thing is certainly women don't need to orgasm in order to be fertile, and the same is true of men. Men don't need to have erections in order to be fertile, and yet curiously nobody says that the male erectile system is somehow a byproduct. Now I find that's kind of interesting, and I'm not just trying to be facetious or contentious for the sake of it. Male erection is sufficiently a problem that there is a huge industry devoted to correcting for male erectile dysfunction, Viagra and all the rest of it, and yet nobody runs around saying, men aren't designed to have sex.
A small clarification is needed here. Can a man ejaculate without experiencing an orgasm?
Oh, yes. If you stimulate the prostate in the right way, men will ejaculate without particularly having an orgasm, although if you stimulate the penis at the same time as the prostate, you get extra pleasure. But if you were just trying to get sperm out, or just trying to extract sperm, you could just do it by pressing on the prostate. I think nurses do that under some circumstances. Whereas somehow, if there's an orgasm gap, women don't always orgasm during sex, which is true. One of the go-to explanation for this is either women are badly designed by nature, which is the byproduct account, or they're psychologically broken, which is Freud's account. And this is where I became really interested, because it seemed to me that when you study evolution, one of the things that becomes obvious, ancestral women and very likely modern women were having a lot more sex than patriarchal societies were willing to acknowledge they were having. And then they were essentially choosing consciously or unconsciously which sperm they were going to retain. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been tough to study, is because people have got it into their heads that what women do is they fixate on a particular guy, then what they want to do is just sort of stick with him. Well, it's not the only female strategy out there. And a lot of men and some women have a tough time bending their heads around that.
Let's talk about multiple orgasms in women. Why don't men get them? I think you have a very interesting theory on that.
Right, yes. I think it was Freud who said orgasm doesn't tell men to have sex. Orgasm tells men when to stop having sex. So, I mean, for men, that's it. They've downloaded their genetic information, and that's basically it. That's why they can fall asleep at that point, which can be very frustrating to their partner. It looks like women can multiply orgasm. Yeah, absolutely. Their refraction period is way quicker. A refraction period is the period in between potential orgasms. I've known women who can orgasm multiple times in an hour. When I say multiple, I mean, dozen times in an hour. That's entirely possible.
In 1 hour?
Oh, yeah, possibly, yeah.
Oh, my
I think Sarah Bluffer Hardy, she wondered whether our primate ancestors, the females, were having multiple partners and were then selecting sperm from particular ones. We've investigated this with humans. Baker and Bellis did some studies on sperm selection, and they sort of the implication was that women, certainly ancestral women, possibly modern women, were having a lot of partners very, very close to each other. If a partner is attendant to you and doesn't fall asleep and make sure you orgasm plenty of times, then you're probably an oxytocin-rich area, and the fertility chances go up enormously. There's an old story. The Tiresias, who was the He was the one of the prophets in ancient Greece, and he'd been both a man and a woman. He's a mythological character. And Tiresias was asked, so who has the most enjoyment during sex? And he said, oh, women, definitely. And so the gods blinded him for giving the game away, because you're not allowed to say things like that. Women don't always orgasm, but when they do, it seems to be more intense than male orgasm. It seems to have more emotional components too.
Do you have an explanation for why women have been studied so little in this regard? Have men been studied, or has everything been sort of clear about them too? It is often said that the clitoris hasn't been researched so far, nothing is clear yet, and things like that. What have you come across? Do you have an explanation why?
I think there are multiple reasons. I think one is that I've talked about female choice mechanisms. Female choice mechanisms are often cryptic. And that's not just in humans, that's across nature. So one of the best strategies sexually is to pretend you don't have a strategy. And I think a lot of men are just fooled by this. They're fooled by the idea that women are coy, they don't like sex, they have to be persuaded or coerced or paid to have it. And as a consequence of that, female sexuality is seen as a kind of pale reflection of male sexuality. So that's one strand. Another is androcentrism. In neuroscience and psychology and biology generally, we tend to study male animals. I mean, that's not just humans. I know of labs which they deal with research on rat brains. I sort of look at it and kind of go, oh, those are all male rat brains. I think, oh yes, why is that? Well, because the female rat brains have hormones that makes them difficult to study. I think, yeah, maybe that matters. Maybe that. So that's. I don't think it's not a baked-in sexism exactly, but it matters, and a lot of neuroscientists have become aware of the fact that this matters. I think also we run interference on each other's sexuality. We chop bits off each other. I think this is an astonishing fact, but human beings are always chopping bits off children's genitalia in order to control their sexuality. And I don't want to get into the politics or religion of this, but just consider what that is from a biological perspective. When we see bees doing things like if the male bee snaps its penis off in the female bee, and then the male bee explodes, everyone sort of goes, "Isn't nature amazing?" The male bee has created this chastity belt for the female bee to prevent her mating with others. You think maybe humans do something similar. Maybe humans are also preventing sex with other humans, in various kinds of ways, except that we don't have penises that snap off. What we have is cultural practices. That's what we evolved, what Richard Dawkins calls the extended phenotype. And we are incredibly ingenious when it comes to creating guilt, misinformation, or chopping bits off each other's bodies in order to get in the way. And I think part of the problem here is it tends to be seen as a men versus women thing. Now, it can be. I'm not saying it isn't, but your members of your own sex are also typically your fiercest competitors. So women run interference on each other's sexuality as well. Once again, this happens across taxa. If you watch baboons, the dominant female baboon will go around the subordinate female baboon, whacking them and making them stressed, increasing their cortisol level and reducing their fertility. That's true of humans as well. We just call it bullying, or Instagram. We know that oxytocin-mediated uterine peristalsis, that's the long-winded term for there's pressure changes in the uterus that we know if oxytocin, which comes about through orgasm, can increase the uptake of sperm. So we know it has all the symptoms of increasing fertility. So that's on the one side. So the other question is, well, is it culturally determined? And that's a really interesting question, because what is culture? Culture doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from individuals. And in the case of humans, individuals are constantly running interference on each other's sexuality. And for an interesting bunch of reasons, this is where the anthropologists come in. Some cultures celebrate female orgasm. For example, the temples at Karnataka have complex carvings on them detailing exactly how to make sure and maximize pleasure for both sexes across a range of permutations. So they celebrate it. And there are other cultures where they actually chop off women's the external part of women's clitorises to try and prevent orgasm happening at all. So those are the two extremes. Why do we get those extremes? Well, one reason we get those extremes is a cultural input. Some cultures are what the anthropologists call intimate. The men and women live together. They more or less get along. The men share in childcare practices that tend to be present at the birth of the children. And those cultures tend to celebrate orgasm and try and maximize it. At the other end of the spectrum, you get the aloof cultures, where the men and women live separate lives. They sometimes live in separate parts of the village. They can have separate languages. They have separate myth cycles, where the men are portrayed as these dangerous rapists with some justification. The women are portrayed as evil witches. And the sexes live separately. There is sex between them, otherwise you wouldn't get little aloof culture people running around. But the sex there tends to be clandestine or coerced or commercialized. Now, so here's the rub. Which one do we live in? Well, we live in a mixture of both. So we have people in our culture. So some audience members will have heard of Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate would be a good representative of aloof culture, masculinity. He's on record as saying female orgasm is a liberal lie and he's sick of it. And that would be a good example of what we're talking about. Well, first approximation, we are savanna apes. That's true. We're used to small groups and mostly kin. That's true. All of that stuff is a good first approximation, but it's not the final answer. And humans there are a number of different set points that we can occupy that are evolutionarily stable strategies. Aloof and intimate cultures would be a sort of two poles of that. They're both quite stable. I put it to you, I think one is more pleasant than the other to live in. And we've got good reasons for promoting one or the other for reasons of justice and pleasure and all the rest of it.
Female ejaculation is actually illegal to portray in the UK. That was a ruling that was brought in about 10 years ago now. And the idea was that, well, what's happening is urination, and urinating on people is extreme perversion, and so you can't show it. So it's worth pointing out that it's not urine, okay? There is an ejaculate that is produced. It has water in it, but it also has zinc. It has fructose. Also, if you're interested, smell it, taste it. It's not urine. In 15th century Japan, that are designed to just collect female ejaculate. It was considered to have health-giving properties, and that would be a good example of the way our culture is a bit Puritan about these kinds of things. That those kinds of things can't be portrayed, despite the fact they are a natural occurrence.
Some cultures have a tradition of clitoral circumcision, doing it to deprive women of sexual pleasure. Have such women been studied?
So, with a clitoridectomy, this is the external part, okay, of the clitoris, and this would be quite a long clitoris. And with the most extreme parts, this whole thing is cut off completely, often with non-sterile implements. Typically at sort of age 8, the girl's legs are tied together, and in the full pharaonic, which is a scraping clean of not just the external parts of the clitoris but also the labia. There's also then an infibulation, and the whole area is sewn up with a small hole to pee through. And this is it's very extreme. Medical complications are considerable, and the males in these cultures are expected to burst the stitches on the wedding night. That sort of ensures paternity certainty. Often this is occasions large amounts of pain, as you could imagine. And Hanny Lightfoot Klein was interested in interviewing the women who had this happen. Also, it's a culture where the female enjoyment of sex is completely taboo. The way she puts it via an interpreter was basically the man and the woman are role-playing. The man plays the part of the rapist, the female plays the part of the rape victim, and she's meant to show no pleasure at all. That's the cultural norm. And yet, when she interviewed these women afterwards, she said, "Well, what's sex like?" And a considerable number of them reported exactly the same phenomenological symptomatology, if we can call it that, that our participants were reporting. In other words, feelings of floating. One woman said, if my baby fell off the bed, I wouldn't notice. Feelings are sensations of apnea, sensations of internal pulsing, and feelings of trust and bliss. Now that's really interesting because I was astonished. How is this possible? Which just that was massively against the official story. I don't think by the official story, I mean the byproduct account, the idea that this is the only sensitive area. Now, clearly it's not the only sensitive area. However, it's what you're effectively doing when you're removing this area from a woman. You are condemning her to only be stimulated by internal stimulation. That's the only thing that she can be stimulated by. She can't really arouse herself very easily, and she can't really be aroused by other women very easily. So you're essentially making her dependent on the men.
Well, wait. Not many of the women I have talked to about sex have shared that they have experienced vaginal orgasms. Very few. Why is that?
So several things are likely. One is that quite a lot of time people have sex when they're not particularly aroused. The woman might feel pressured into having sex. She's not particularly aroused. The boyfriend or the husband is particularly aroused, and you get, right, let's just get this over with. She's unlikely to have an orgasm with just that kind of stimulation under those circumstances. I mean, I think the arousal thing is probably the biggest single element. The functional equivalent to male erection is female lubrication, and if you talk to a lot of women are having sex where they're not lubricated, so there isn't the right kind of stimulation. Plus, I think a lot of the time they are uncomfortable about telling their male partners what they want, and one of my reasons for thinking this is I listen to lesbians. So I would advise men and women to listen to lesbians who will give advice about sex. And it might surprise people. Go, well, wait a minute. No, a lot of lesbians do have penetrative sex. There is a market for penetrative dildos because they're women. They know about women's bodies, so they're more comfortable. I'm assuming they're more comfortable talking about these things, and they're also more comfortable in stimulating a vast range of areas simultaneously. And I would suggest that both men and women pay attention to that.
Not sure if you have a similar saying, but back in Russia we say, women love with their ears. Thus, the complexity of it all. She has to be talked to, she has to fall in love with what she hears first, and then everything falls into place.
When I first started studying female orgasm, a woman said to me, look, Rob, what you have to understand is women want three things from a man. The first thing is they want someone who is kind and dependable, they can rely on. And the second thing is that they want a man who is dynamic and masculine and makes them feel like a woman. And the third thing is they want those first two men to never meet each other. I think one of the things that captures, and there's similar jokes about men. We need to be fantasy versions of each other, as well as the day-to-day, dependable version, who pays the bills and doesn't go out and all the rest of it.
In your research, have you ever met a woman who gets turned on by dick pics?
Excellent question. So a lot of us in sex research are puzzled by dick pics. I'll tell you now, because what's going on here? I've never met a woman who seems to be actively soliciting them. Now, maybe there is a secret population of women who are soliciting these things and they're just keeping quiet about it. That's one hypothesis. I have no evidence for it. I'm a scientist, I have a tidy mind. Assuming that isn't the case, then there is some kind of signalling problem going on here. Either men are trying to intimidate women, they're exhibitionists. We always knew they were male flashers. They exhibit themselves to women and they're trying to intimidate them, and they've somehow got their wires crossed. Or they could be thinking that this is actually arousing. I mean, there's another way of getting your wires crossed. It could be that because you're aroused at this point, and normally when you're with a heterosexual partner, then the fact of your arousal is interesting to them as well as you. They're sort of going, well, I'm aroused, she might be aroused, she's going to want to see that I'm aroused. Except the thing is, she's not aroused. Okay, so the penis is not a particularly interesting organ, except to its owner. Unless the person on the receiving end is sufficiently aroused themselves, and they're not. So these things coming out of nowhere. I don't think I've ever met a woman who hasn't received a dick pic at some point. So, I mean, the other possibility, and it's a very remote one, is that it's kind of like spam email. The hit rate is incredibly low, a fraction of 1%, but there is a population out there that somehow is responsive to it. And we haven't found that population. If they want to come and be studied, then we're really happy to study them. But we think if they are out there, we think they're a real minority. We think it's men getting their signals crossed. I mean, it could be men trying to intimidate women, because that's always a thing. Men trying to intimidate and control women is always a part of human sexuality.
I'd like to ask our viewers if any of them have ever experienced pleasure or an orgasm from a dick pic sent to them. Please write to us in the comments. We'd be quite interested in conducting such a scientific survey. Can you tell me if a woman's orgasm depends on foreplay? Or are these two completely separate things, and an orgasm is possible without all these useless things?
Okay, so I mean, yeah, sure, orgasm can be achieved without it, but that's very far from saying it's redundant. I mean, for one thing, it's fun, and secondly, you're demonstrating your commitment and interest in your partner. I mean, when did sex stop being fun for people? It's awful, isn't it? I spoke about the Mangaians earlier, and the Mangaians are a Polynesian group who. They are quite an aloof society, but the women have a huge amount of social and financial, the equivalent of financial clout. And in that culture, the older women train the younger men before the younger men are let loose on the younger women. And a large part, not the only thing, but a large part, what the younger men show is their capacity to bring a partner to orgasm using oral sex. And a large part of the culture would be, unless you've brought your partner to orgasm during oral sex, you're not allowed to put your penis anywhere near her. That's probably a good idea. Learning those kinds of things is almost certainly a good idea. I mean, and the Mangaians seem to be doing pretty well as a result of it. Whenever I give talks about this kind of stuff, the women tend to be sort of nudging their partners and sort of but it's certainly she's certainly getting much more in the mood. Yeah.
This one is an awkward question, but I wonder why women who are aroused by nipple stimulation, why don't we experience the same feeling when we breastfeed a baby? When the nipple stimulation is similar. Physically, it seems to be a similar action, but why do women react so differently to it?
Yes, that's a really interesting question. Okay, so the basic answer is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the chemical of mammals, and its primary use is actually to produce milk. That's what oxytocin evolved for. And it looks like what evolution has done is what it does a lot of the time, which is it takes a mechanism that works in one place and it applies it to another one. So the primary thing is the milk production, and that creates those feelings of affiliation. And when women are breastfeeding, they get these kinds of dreamy feelings quite often if it's going well, which are associated with it. The other thing evolution does is it'll take mechanisms and it'll keep one going while switching another one off. So, for example, I mean, a classic example is parenting. We love our children, but if all things are working properly, the sexual part of loving children gets switched off. I mean, that's it's not just with parents and children; it's also with siblings. It's called the Westermarck effect, and it means that we don't typically have sexual feelings towards family members. We have other things that are quite closely related to those things, but that component of it just gets switched off. I mean, that happens in. I mean, a more anatomical one. You can't. If you're a man, you can't urinate if you're aroused. If you're erect, then urination gets switched off. And I think that's just simply what's happening here. You're still getting oxytocin production during breastfeeding. It's just you aren't getting the sexual arousal feelings at the same time. Whereas if you are being sexually aroused, then those pathways aren't being switched off. Freud at one point said something like. Women would be amazed if they realised that the affection that they're giving to their offspring is a kind of an overspill of the kind of affection they give to their sexual partners. And I think here, as in other places, he's almost got it almost exactly the wrong way around. The primary thing for oxytocin is breastfeeding, and also it's associated with childbirth. It creates uterine peristalsis. If you're being induced for childbirth, then one of the ways you induce uterine peristalsis, that function that people think doesn't happen because it's a byproduct, you give people oxytocin and that helps induce the birth. And here, as in other places, Freud's got it the wrong way around. It's more that the kind of affiliative features of oxytocin have been co-opted by evolution in order to bind us to male partners for long enough to grow a child. I mean, we've known for a long time that the median time for partnerships is about 5 years. We don't have a 7-year itch, we tend to have a 5-year itch. And it doesn't seem like that's an accident. 5 years is about how long it takes to grow a child to the point where they're viable. They've got to the point where they're now beyond breastfeeding. They've got through their potential childhood diseases. At that point, you're sort of looking at your partner going, right, are we going to have another one or am I going to move on? And that seems to be the glue that holds us together for about that long. And it just seems to have been co-opted in order to glue us to that partner for that long as well. Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference in orgasms between having sex with someone you love dearly and someone you have just met, a one-night stand?
Yes, there's interesting research on this. I mean, one of the most interesting things we found is that the strongest predictor of female orgasmic response was attractive partner smell. Now, that was really interesting because we were the first to publish on this, and partner smell is interesting because it seems to convey information about immune system compatibility. So if you have a compatible immune system, you'll have strong babies. There are 6 key genes that you want to be dissimilar on so that your babies will have enough of your genes that you're immune to whatever diseases are current, but also you're staying one step ahead of other pathogens. So that would imply that some of these responses can change. I suppose it depends what you mean by love, at the risk of being disingenuous. Love means different things, and there are different systems, aren't there? So there is a basic hormonal system that makes us horny, sort of non-specifically aroused. Men get more of that than women because we have testosterone, and that gives us that. Women get some of it, but men have more of that non-specific horniness. And then there's the dopaminergic circuit, which binds you to a particular person. And then there's the oxytocin one, which seems to produce the long-term commitment. And if somebody's... the trouble is there's so many confounding variables. If you're going out and you're having a one-night stand and you're drunk and you're tired and you're guilty, then you're unlikely to have an orgasm. If, on the other hand, you've picked somebody out because they have a certain kinds of qualities and you've really kind of hunted them down and all the rest of it, then it seems like you're more likely to orgasm.
Could it also be the case when you are trying to woo someone, you are more psychologically excited, but once you have won someone over, why bother? She or he is already yours. Could this be part of our psychology?
So David Buss has this idea, I think it was him who first came up with it. We used to think one of the things that was happening was that women would form a primary mateship, and then if a certain kind of male came along, they would go and harvest sperm from that male and increased orgasm chance with particular males. And I still think that happens. I don't think it happens that often, but I think it does happen at least some of the time. But what David Buss has suggested is that in about 70% of the case when women do have affairs, they fall in love with the new partner, which goes against the sperm harvesting theory. And what he thinks is more likely is a kind of what he calls monkey branching. The idea that when somebody's in a primary mateship, it's going okay, but they're kind of, there is this saying that your woman might not be having an affair. However, if you go away, she knows who you're going to be replaced with. This idea that you don't leave one partnership until you've kind of got another one lined up. And certainly what we found about orgasms would fit that. That what she's doing is she's testing you out. She's kind of going, okay, well let's see what you've got. And it also sort of suggests that one of the reasons male orgasm doesn't vary. That's the thing. Female orgasm does vary. In biology, phenotypic variance tracks reproductive variance. Okay, and phenotypic variance here is all the qualities that make somebody desirable. Height, status, competitiveness, kindness, intelligence, all those kinds of things. Male reproductive variance is wider than female reproductive variance. I mean, we know this genetically. For example, if you look at our DNA, we have 40% of men ancestrally reproduced, 80% of women did. You have twice as many mothers as you do fathers. That can seem very counterintuitive, but that's because there are some men who are very successful and some men who are not successful. Okay, so what happens when you apply this knowledge to female orgasmic variance? Well, the obvious thought is female orgasmic variance tracks male phenotypic variance. The reason that women's orgasms are variable is because their partners are variable and their responses to them are variable because they are increasing their fertility in proportion to the phenotypic variance of the potential partner. So if they have, what this means in crude terms is if they're having an affair and they're being sexually satisfied, they're more likely to leave. Yeah.
Why is marital sex shorter and the orgasm is achieved sooner? Is there an explanation for this? Why isn't that working the other way round? Why doesn't getting to know the other half better help us prolong this pleasure?
So Dan Savage, the sex advice columnist, he says one of the things that seems to happen with this is heterosexual partners, and when they're trying to have a baby, he says one of the things they do is what he calls sacred fucking. So they have a list of the things that they can do, and there's a timing of when they can do it, and so go right. Okay, so come home from work now. I'm ovulating. You know, I've taken my temperature, and okay, off we go. Yeah, and you've sucked all of the features that made you attracted to each other out of the equation. You know, you've sucked away the eroticism. It's sort of striking that people who do that often have a tough time getting pregnant, and that when they do get pregnant, quite often there's another baby that comes on quite rapidly. And we don't know this. I just want to say this is speculation, but it's quite possible because at this point they've stopped doing the sacred fucking bit. At this point they've actually gone, oh, let's go back to having sex in a way that we actually enjoy, you know, in a way that we find arousing.
Often when you haven't had sex for a long time, your friends would advise you to have some for your health's sake. You need sex for health. I wonder if orgasms actually cause a surge of hormones. Do they boost our immune system? Are they beneficial for our health? Or is it all just a myth?
I think I'm right in saying that for men, regular orgasm is important for things like prostate health. It's certainly the case that women we've interviewed who haven't had an orgasm for a long time become sexually frustrated. Or if they've had sex without orgasm, they become sexually frustrated. So I can't imagine why that would be good for you.
Does our orgasm change with the availability of a lot of pornography, with the availability of a wide range of pornography? How much is our arousal decreased because we have sort of seen it all in porn and nothing can really turn us on in real life?
There's an awful lot of female porn out there. It's just, it's verbal. It's written. The 50 Shades of Grey sold 50 million copies. It was extremely popular. And I'm not saying it's a universal female fantasy, but it's certainly not an uncommon female fantasy. And it has the components we were talking about earlier. You have a dominant male, BDSM components to it. And when women get the chance, women dragging their menfolk in there going, I want to do some of this kinky stuff. And it was the women driving it, definitely. So do we think that's healthy? Yes. I mean, I think the problem that we get is that, firstly, it was the problem talked about earlier, where it's this idea that this is male dominance fantasies are clearly a male thing, and they're not. There's a huge market from women for them. Which I think people have a tough time acknowledging because politics and feminism gets involved, and they think, well, how can I be a feminist, you know, and be into being kinky? And I think the answer to that is because if feminism is about anything, it's about having what you want. Somebody said, you know, it's perfectly rational for us to want in the bedroom things we would march in the streets to get rid of. So there's a bird called the hornbill, and hornbills are large African predatory birds, and they've got these magnificent bills, and the females of the species are slightly bigger than the males, and the females will take on things like rattlesnakes that the males will not touch. So they're not wimps, okay? And when the female hornbill finds a male with whom she's attracted because he's got a big hornbill and he's very sexy for those reasons, she will wall herself up. So she mates with him, and she finds a tree, and with his help, she walls herself up. So it's mud and water. So she's almost literally concreted in. She plucks her own feathers off, so she's now dependent on him. So she's basically enslaved by the male, sort of. But the point is that he now has to go off and provision her. Yeah, he is now locked to her biologically. If he goes off and philanders and finds another female hornbill, then that means the eggs that he's got with her will die. So he's every bit as much a prisoner as she is, in a way. Now, the moment you start realizing that, you start realizing that some of the female fantasies about BDSM have exactly the same kind of properties. There is a symbolic ownership by the male. Yeah. However, that symbolic ownership by the male compels investment because the female has now made herself temporarily and in play way, if we're doing it in the modern era, dependent on him. He can't now abandon her. If he abandons her, then she'll die. And I don't think these patterns are unique to humans, and they're not necessarily, there's nothing pathological about them. In fact, the evidence is that people who have kinky sex lives are much mentally healthier than the general population. And I suspect one of the reasons for that is because the people who are open about these things aren't repressing their desires in the way that other people might be.
Есть ли у вас ответ, какой сегодня жанр предпочитаете? Do you know what genre women prefer today? We sort of know what men prefer, as porn sites publish year-end charts that rank the top 10 most popular trends. Что касается женщин. What about women's preferences in porn?
Things to do with threesomes are always up there, and that's threesomes potentially involving other women or potentially involving more than one guy, and group sex in general. Another thing that's a very interesting feature of female pornography that's not talked about enough is slash fiction. The slash refers to a grammatical slash, so you'll have two male characters. They'll typically be famous people. It might be the actors who play the famous people, or it might be the characters they play. So typically would be Holmes/Watson, and that would be Benedict Cumberbatch, Martin Freeman, there you go. And I remember seeing Cumberbatch interviewed about this, and he was saying, you know, I've read all this porn about me and Martin, you know, and what will happen, you know, is that I'll come home at the end of the day of doing some detectoring, and then Martin will ask me some things, and then we'll go at it, you know. And he says I'm usually on the receiving end. I mean, a lot of this stuff is quite filthy. Other characters that get involved, Kirk and Spock are very popular. The male dyads, and in these dyads, one male is much more sort of typically masculine than the other one. Tends to be the dominant, and not always penetrative sex, but quite often penetrative sex. But one will be the sort of more dominant partner, one will be more feminine partner. And this pornography is exclusively written by women, and women's pornography reflects that. So, you know, if you've got a character in female pornography, he will be tall, he will be good looking, but it's quite non-specific good looking. It's just good looking enough. But he'll have certain kinds of qualities. He will be dynamic, he will be intelligent, he will be a crucial thing is he will be somebody who could have a lot of women. And I mean, one of the main themes of a lot of female porn is this guy could have lots of women, but he's going to choose me. And that's that. And quite often there's quite a complicated plot in the slash fiction of making sure that you're the one he commits to. So that's a very common theme.
Is there a connection between self-esteem and an orgasm?
Oh, right, yeah, almost certainly. People can feel very guilty if they can't orgasm. They can feel very guilty that their partner can't give them an orgasm, those kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, and we've spoken to a lot of women who are frustrated, and I mean, just the mere fact of frustration itself suggests that there is something going on here, that there is a need that's not being satisfied. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that's so crippling about the whole female genital mutilation thing. You know, it's much tougher to orgasm, obviously, you know, even through penetration, but you can't orgasm any other way either. You know, so you're much more likely to be frustrated. I mean, it used to be thought that one of the things that Freud brought about was this idea of relieving frustration through masturbating clients to orgasm. But it looks like that was unfortunately, that's been largely debunked, unfortunately. It looked like it might have been true that there were rafts of unsatisfied Victorian women and the neurologists were masturbating them, but unfortunately that seems to be a myth. Mm-hmm. It was a great story, but it's been debunked, I'm afraid.
Can you give men 3 tips on how to make a woman orgasm faster? What have you learned while researching this topic?
I'm not sure I want to give men advice on how to give women orgasms fast. I would say there's a song, isn't there, that goes, the kind of men that women need are built for comfort, not for speed. Pay attention to create a space where your partner can tell you honestly what they want, which isn't as easy as it sounds, actually, because, you know, we make ourselves vulnerable. You know, we're making ourselves very vulnerable when we say, I want this and I don't want that. It's not as easy as it first appears. So creating that kind of space is tough. And then sort of, you know, be alert, and also be willing to change. I know men who are threatened by vibrators, for example. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've had partners say, you know, my partner won't use a vibrator. In fact, he doesn't even want me to own a vibrator because he's threatened by it. And I'm sort of going, All right, so, okay, if men are not, if any of the stereotypes about us are true, then how about making this one true? Be a nerd, learn how to use a vibrator properly. I mean, it's just like any other tool that you might use in the shed. And a woman is saying, I would really like to do this with you. And you're going, no, that's not the way it should happen. Just don't do that. If a woman says she wants to orgasm with you, however she wants to do it, as long as it's legal, pay attention to that would be one bit of advice. There needs to be a fantasy version of us, I think, for both sexes, that is something akin to play. The great sex advice columnist, Dan Savage, he talked about, he says that BDSM is cops and robbers with your pants off. But he's talking about BDSM, you don't have to be into that level of kink. But some level of fantasy is important. Some level of play is important. We're a playful species, and I think we often lose that. And we need to create space for that sort of eroticism, and the biggest sex organ, the most important sex organ is the brain. That kind of stuff.